Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're doing the governor's race in the state of Virginia and talking about the latest polls and polling averages in the state of Virginia or the Commonwealth of Virginia. I just did a video on New Jersey as well, so make sure at the end of this video to go check that one out as well if you want some information on what's going on in that race. So for the state of Virginia, Virginia is one of the other governor's races that is up in 2025. At the presidential level, it just voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by 5.8%, a likely Democratic win in the 5 to 15 point scale. And this governor's race is a very anticipated one that is happening around the country, as the current the current Virginia governorship is held by the incumbent Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, who won a very close election in 2021, defeating the Democrat Terry McAuliffe. Now, this race is facing off between Republican Winsome Earle Sears, who is the current lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia, and Abigail Spanberger, the former U.S. Congresswoman of the 7th Congressional District from 2019 to 2025. So they are going to be the two main candidates for this race, and as always with off-year governor elections in Virginia and New Jersey, this is getting a lot of national attention. As for the general election thus far, most of the prediction websites have been saying this is a likely to lean or solid, depending on which you're looking at, but consensus is a likely Democratic win. Again, likely being in between that 5 and 15% margin of victory amount here. So definitely Spanberger seems to have the lead according to the predictions on this. Now for the polling, obviously that's why we're here. The polling shows very similarly here, where the newest poll from Trafalgar Group, a Republican-aligned pollster, still shows Spanberger leading over Sears by roughly 5 points. And using my own rule, which is that when it's an internal poll or a partisan poll, I usually go 5 points in the opposite direction of the pollster itself. So that means that 5-point win would essentially become a 10-point win for Spanberger, which is right in line with what the most recent Emerson College poll was. Overall, Real Clear Politics' polling average has Spanberger at 50.8%, Earle Sears at 42.5%, 6.7% currently other or undecided, with Spanberger leading by 8.3%. That is a likely Democratic lead. On the Decision Desk HQ, it does show a more competitive race, but still a Spanberger lead nonetheless, at 49.6% for her, 43.2% for Winsome Earle Sears, 7.2% undecided. That is a Spanberger plus 6.4. And then on the race to the White House, they have Spanberger at 51.1, Sears 42.4, other undecided 6.5, Spanberger's leading by 8.7%. On average of these three polling averages, Abigail Spanberger currently has the lead of 50.5%, Sears 42.7%, and other undecided 6.8, overall an average of Spanberger plus 7.8%. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, I just finished talking about New Jersey, and I was showing how the polling data in that race is looking a lot closer and a lot more competitive, and honestly sort of what a governor's race in an election where the incumbent president was actually a Democrat is kind of how the polling's looking like. So the way these governor's elections often go in the off-year elections is whichever party controls the White House, usually the party that's not in charge of the White House does well in these two governor elections in Virginia and New Jersey. Now in New Jersey, it seems to be the opposite, where even though the Democratic candidate is winning, the Republican there is making it a really tough fight, and the polls are very close, all under 5 points. The Virginia governor's race, however, is polling exactly pretty much in line with what a off-year governor election would probably look like, where the Democratic candidate is already at or breaking 50% of the vote, guaranteeing essentially a victory if the polls are correct, and the Republican candidate is down in the low 42-43% or so. And right now, Abigail Spanberger versus Winsome Sears seems to be essentially a lock for a Democratic win. Now, Virginia does have two other big races going on for the lieutenant governor and for the attorney general's race. At this current point in time, the only one that really is competitive is the attorney general race, and that is due to the fact of the scandal surrounding the Democratic candidate Jay Jones and the statements that he's been made in the media cycle going on with him. I'm not going to delve into it too much in this video because I want this video to focus on the governor's race, but you can certainly go look out more about that and all that's happening there. But that's the only real competitive race. Otherwise, on the governor's side for Virginia, Abigail Spanberger's leading by roughly 8 to 7 points or so on average here, and she has a clear lead over Winsome Sears. It's also worth noting that Spanberger is already breaking that 50% threshold. Now, what's interesting, and we're going to look at the 2021 and 2017 race, is this is actually the most blown out lopsided margin the polling data has been in the past 3 governor's races in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So just to show you 2021, which again, Joe Biden was the Democratic president, his approval numbers started going down, and that gave the Republican Glenn Youngkin a potential opening in this race. It ended up with Youngkin leading in the polling averages by roughly 1.7% over Terry McAuliffe. And 538 had Youngkin winning by 1%. But again, look at the margins too. Youngkin had 48.5, McAuliffe had 46.8. It was a very, very close election that for most of the campaign, it actually showed Terry McAuliffe leading over Glenn Youngkin. Now, McAuliffe was the former governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. He had a lot higher name recognition throughout pretty much the entire campaign than Glenn Youngkin did. But Youngkin, going into the final days and final weeks of the campaign, you see all the blue leading polls. It started to have a few more and more reds, so much so in the final few weeks or so. Emerson showed a tied race. Fox News showed Youngkin winning. Trafalgar showed Youngkin winning, and it ended up being a very close and narrow race that Glenn Youngkin narrowly won. But the polling data was tight throughout, and 48.5 to 46.8, the 4.8% of voters that were either other or undecided ultimately decided to end up winning this race when everything was said and done. When the results came in, Glenn Youngkin got up to 50.58%, McAuliffe got 48.64%, and the Liberation candidate only got 0.7% of the vote. So both Youngkin and McAuliffe got a good percentage of those undecided voters or third-party voters. Now, for 2017, this is the inverse. This is a governor election where Donald Trump was just elected president. His approval numbers were not looking so hot heading into this race. And even still, the Democrat Ralph Northam was leading over the Republican Ed Gillespie in the final polling numbers by 3.3%. Now, that's very close in the polling, but other undecided, 7.9%. So again, I've made this point for both New Jersey and Virginia now. The undecideds and other people supporting other candidates is what make or breaks these races. What do they decide to do? Because that's a very considerable amount, 8% of the vote being undecided, that could swing a race one way or the other. Now in 2021, as we showed the polling data here, there was only about 5% undecided, which is still more than enough to swing the race, but decently not as big as like 8%. That's literally almost close to double what that ended up being. But in 2017, Ralph Northam still led over Ed Gillespie 47.7 to 44.4. Now in this one, the national environment suggested that the Democrats should do better than the Republicans, seeing as Donald Trump was president, his approval ratings weren't doing too good, and pretty much every poll in the last week or so of the election, aside from Republican-affiliated polls, showed Northam leading over the Republican Ed Gillespie, who early on, though, Gillespie started out actually leading in this race over Ralph Northam. He was in the low 40s, Northam was in the mid to high 30s, and there was a lot of undecided vote. Now, throughout the spring and summertime, Northam started to take the lead in this race, and it looked like he was sort of home free here. Gillespie made it a really close race. In October, you see some polls going back and forth here, and then the final few days of the campaign, Northam regained the lead and ultimately ended up winning. But the margins in which Northam won, based on the polls, was about 3.3%. That would be a lean Democratic win. Now, what ultimately happened was the polls missed it, essentially, on Northam support. Gillespie's really wasn't off too much, though. Gillespie got 44.97% of the vote in the final results. Again, he was polling at 44.4. So it seems that in these races, there's always one candidate that the polling data gets essentially close to right. And Gillespie was only off by roughly about 0.5%. Northam's support was the one that missed here. Northam, in the polls, had about 47%. He ended up nearly getting 54% of the vote, as a lot of the undecided voters broke for Northam. And a considerable amount did in that election. Now, what does this mean for 2025? Well, again, the polling data right now in Virginia for 2025, Spanberger is breaking 50% of the vote already. Winsome Sears at 42.5%, 43.2%, and 42.4%, an average of 42.7%. Now, there's still a pretty decent amount of undecided voters left out there. There are not enough undecided voters, though, in my opinion, for Winsome Sears to win this race, due to the fact that Abigail Spanberger, at the absolute lowest in the polling average, is getting 49.6%. For Winsome Sears to win this race, she essentially needs to bank on Republican voter turnout being so high and the polls being incredibly wrong, which, based on the last few governor's elections, have actually been pretty decent in terms of predicting which candidate would win. This situation, though, not so much. She's already in a very tough situation with Spanberger breaking 50% in 2 out of the 3 averages. So Sears' chance of winning this race is really not going to be too great. The question will be what the margin ends up being. Because right now it's around a 8 to 7 point win or so on the polling averages. Well, there's still about 6 to 7% of voters undecided. So that could literally go anywhere from up to like a 14-point Democratic win to maybe even down potentially to a 3-4 point Democratic win if everything goes Winsome Sears' way. Now, if the undecided is essentially split, maybe Spanberger wins, say, 60% of them, you could see Spanberger winning this race around a 9 to 10 point margin, which my own personal prediction rankings right now, I do have Spanberger winning by around that 9.5 to 10 point range. I'm not sure if it breaks 10, but Spanberger does seem to be clearly in control of this race against Winsome Sears. And you see how this race unfolded in 2021. It's not like a Republican can't win in Virginia. It's certainly an uphill battle, but Glenn Youngkin just showed how a Republican can win. However, Winsome Sears in this campaign is not so far being able to get the momentum that Glenn Youngkin did. Again, in the final polls, he was getting 48.5% of the vote. Winsome Sears is running approximately 6 points behind what Glenn Youngkin was doing at this point in time in 2021. And Abigail Spanberger is running at 50.8%. In that polling average, she is running roughly about 4 points ahead of what Terry McAuliffe was doing. So the math just really isn't there for Winsome Sears to win this race. Now, that's the polling average. So obviously when talking about this race, when you go to the map here, I have it going likely for the Democrats, which means a 5 to 15% margin of victory, and I think we see it on election night fall between there. The real question is going to be the margin of this race. I think it's right now just a bit shy of 10 points, around 9.5%. I do think some of the undecideds do break towards Winsome Sears a little bit, but not enough to make this race competitive in terms of like a New Jersey competitive race that we're looking at right now. What I do like to look at, though, are past elections and see how they did. In 2021, obviously, Youngkin got 50.57%. 2017, Gillespie got 44.97%. So could we see Winsome Sears do even worse than Gillespie's 44.97? It's certainly possible. It's hard to imagine Sears not getting close to that number, but we could see her finishes a little bit below that. But again, there are still enough undecided voters out there to maybe break around that number. Back in 2013, there was a much more competitive race, but the Republican got 45.23%, and there was a third-party candidate in that one. 2009 was a big Republican win, so we're not going to see that in this election. 2005, we saw this race, the Republican get around 46%, even though Virginia's changed a lot since then. So ultimately, what I think this is setting up for is we're looking at a race where Abigail Spanberger is probably going to get somewhere in the low to mid 50%, right around that 53, 54, 55% range. And then Winsome Sears, I think she gets at least 42%, and then she's somewhere in between that 42 to 45% range as well. So I think it's going to be anywhere between like an 8 and an 11 point victory for Spanberger over Sears. The question is going to be how it ultimately shakes out. But for the purposes of this video and how this race is looking, Spanberger is leading in the likely Democratic category, and I would put Virginia's governor's race as likely Democratic at this point in time. Lastly, just one more thing I want to show you. For the Virginia governor's race, some key areas of the Commonwealth I'm watching for on election night. So in 2021, some key areas that Glenn Youngkin improved on to help him win in this governor's race. The western part of the state of Virginia pretty much all voted red in the rural counties. They're smaller in population, but Glenn Youngkin pretty much ran up the numbers very strongly in these key areas. Even if she's losing by a lot, Winsome Sears should be doing this. The key areas I'm watching for, though, I'm watching down here in Virginia Beach. I'm watching down here in Chesapeake. These are two counties that both are very competitive. In 2021, that voted red for Glenn Youngkin, and then in 2017, voted blue for Ralph Northam over Eddie Gillespie. If these two counties are going red or blue, they're going to be a big indicator at how competitive this race could be. Now, it is possible that Winsome Sears could win these two counties and still lose the governor's race, but if she is losing these two counties, it's very unlikely that she is seeing an election where she can win. The most important areas to watch for, though, are the northern D.C. suburbs of Loudoun County, Fairfax County, and Prince William County. These are three areas that in the early 2000s were toss-ups, battleground areas, and have now become very heavy Democratic landslide counties. Loudoun voted 20 points for Northam over Gillespie, Prince William voted 22 points, and Fairfax voted roughly 36 points. Now in 2021, though Glenn Youngkin lost these three, he made significant inroads here, losing Loudoun only by 11, losing Prince William by about 15, and losing Fairfax by around 30. What these margins look like in these three areas could be very telling for how this governor's race goes. It should also be worth noting with the government shutdown going on right now, and with a lot of federal employees getting laid off to the start of President Trump's term and everything going on with that, could they be higher turnout numbers in these three counties of voters who have been laid off? That could potentially boost Democratic turnout as well and could be a key indicator of how this is going. Because by turnout, these three counties are three of the largest population counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia. That even if Winsome Sears way outperformed throughout the rest of Virginia and even won Chesapeake and Virginia Beach, these three counties alone could tip the scales for the Democrat Abigail Spanberger in this race. Another important thing to mention is also Richmond, as I do believe that both Sears and Spanberger are from the Richmond or Greater Richmond area. McAuliffe won it by roughly 18 points in 2021. In 2017, we saw it go roughly 22 points for Northam over Gillespie. The margins of a big Democratic voting center could be important to watch for as well, in the inner city and the surrounding Henrico County as well. A very important area to watch for as well to see how voter turnout is going. Now, that's all I have for you in today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to hit like and remember to hit subscribe if you did. I just passed 6,000 subscribers a few days ago. I'm trying to get to 7,000. So if you could hit like and hit subscribe, I'd really, really appreciate it. Keep an eye out as well on my channel because throughout the month of October, I do have some very big things planned, including some election night simulation videos for Virginia's governor's race, for New Jersey's governor's race, and for the 2025 New York City mayoral race as well. So all those I plan to have coming out towards the middle part of October, so make sure keep an eye out for those. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.